Why, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Innovantage Podcast, where business meets tech to bring you your competitive edge. As always, I'm your host, Max, and it is my job to explore that edge between different technologies and different businesses and how they correlate with one another. And in today's wonderful landscape, that means AI 99% of the time. Maybe it's because AI is that great, maybe it's because we think of it that way, or maybe it's something else. This is why I'm here, and this is what I'm trying to find out. To help me on my quest today is Maxime Vermeir, who is the Senior Director of AI Strategy at ABBYY. Hello, Max. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Max. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. How are you today?
I am pretty good. Thank you very much. We have a wonderful weather in Vilnius. We have snow, we have sun, we don't have the cold, so it's that perfect mix of tranquility, of feeling nice when you walk in the morning. So I am pumped up. How about you?
Talk about making people jealous from minute one into this podcast episode. Just describing that weather. That's beautiful. Well, I'm based out of Belgium. Here, it's typical winter, gloomy, gray skies as always. But we did have a bit of nice weather over the weekend, so that was very good. Maybe I'll quickly introduce myself to your audience, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I'm Max. Thanks again for having me on the podcast. I'm the Senior Director for AI Strategy at ABBYY. I've been in technology, and actually I was at an alumni evening of my university recently, and they gave me even a sticker that said, "You were studying AI before AI was cool." And that did two things. First of all, I felt very cool because I received a sticker. Secondly, it made me feel very old at some point because AI has been around for much longer than a lot of people know, and actually how a lot of people realize. So it's an interesting topic to talk about. Other than that, I've been active in the tech world for a very long time, working on both enterprise technology, SaaS applications, mobile applications. Did a startup back in the day, even before that was cool. So been all over the place, but lately I've been definitely very much focusing on everything artificial intelligence and trying to both educate people and also show them the path of how they can use it productively, because I think that's what we're all trying to get to.
Indeed. It's very lovely to hear that somebody who is as connected to AI as yourself, you don't start with the hype topic of, just AIify everything and actually find the things that are tangible and useful. So let's talk about that then. Looking at AI from a perspective of somebody who was doing it way before it was cool. And being in tech as well, you've seen how we in tech love our hype cycles. And I feel that with every cycle, the more and more people outside of tech get influenced by it, When we transitioned from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, nobody really cared because that was stuff for nerds. But nowadays, when an AI app released into the market, everybody's talking about it. Everybody's doing something with it. It's just the next big thing. OpenAI releases the new version of ChatGPT. That's wow. DeepSeek comes out. That's wow. Musk comes up with the new version of Grok. That's something out of this world. So how are you looking at it? Is the hype real, or is it always fake, or is it more complex?
It is definitely more complex. Just to touch on the subject of that, I think you're absolutely right that AI news, just technology news, has suddenly become much more mainstream, and that both presents itself with a unique blend of, I would say, excitement, because that means that a lot more people are getting educated and understand the technology. It also means for businesses that are working in technology, artificial intelligence right now, it creates opportunity. At the same time, it also means that people that do not have a proper understanding of what this actually means might inflate these expectations or make them out of something that it isn't. I've heard several Terminator stories from people in different age categories, both my own age and others, that are like, okay, Max, should we be worried about my job, about what the future looks like? Are the movies becoming real? So there is that blend of both. But I think definitely also, like you said, in the tech sector, we do love our hype cycles. Gartner came up with that thing for a reason. Nonetheless, the interesting thing that I've kind of seen over the last couple of years is that the hype cycle is becoming a lot shorter. Realization as to what a technology really means is kind of instilling itself into the market a lot faster. And that really means that, if you look at, for example, the move to cloud, right? That was the wild, wild west if you compare it to how stringent controls are right now in terms of customer data, how that works, how that's implemented, how that's secured. And if you now compare that to the cycle of AI and how people have started to adopt it, but also how quickly legislation has come into place, how quickly that's going to take effect, and then actually how quickly, and we can easily see that as an AI vendor, that we actually already are receiving after the short amount of time, which is probably about a year, RFIs, security questionnaires. Tell us how your technology works. How did you build it? What are the intimate details of it? So that we can ensure that if we employ your technology, that it actually safeguards our customers. So that whole process happened a lot faster. And I think that's a very positive thing. So that also means that the kind of realization that there is not one size that fits all, whether that's Grok, whether that's GPT-5, you name it, the one size fits all kind of technology mindset is very quickly dissipating. And I think that's a great thing because I always relish to tell the story about a conversation I had with a bunch of data scientists that were going to build their own large language model to extract values from a piece of paper. And they were going to ask the business for 30,000 documents that they had to annotate. So very quickly, I asked the question, can you show me an example? Because maybe we can help you in a more efficient way. And it turned out that this was actually something as simple as a very strict type of structure in the text, which is called a purchase order, which always had the same format. And that's when I introduced them to the lovely technology, which is called regular expressions. It blew their minds, most of all, because they had simply forgotten that such a things exist and that we could solve their problem in less than 5 minutes. So that just really kind of, for me, personifies, right, that the hype cycle, it is real. There is absolutely things that we are going to be able to apply from everything that's coming out of the hype. But it takes a while for everybody to kind of get settled in and understand that the next big thing isn't going to solve every next thing that comes along in the path.
That's a very refreshing look, like I mentioned in the beginning, that real applications and real technologies just beyond your typical LLMs. Because a lot of the time when I speak about AI, what I hear is, okay, we've made a GPT wrapper that addresses something, or often does not address anything. We just did it because we could. And I believe that the more successful companies and the more successful businesses and the more successful, people generally have a tangible application for AI, and they understand the limitations of the technology that they're trying to apply, and they understand the goals that they are trying to achieve. So how about you at ABBYY? What is it that you do with the AI strategy over there? Is it more so being prepared for it? Is it more about implementing it, researching it? What is it that you do?
It's a bit of everything, right? So in all honesty, as a technology vendor that had already been around for 35 years, also doing AI since before it was cool, well, of course, when the whole hype cycle started, just like with any other hype cycle, it always disrupts the existing providers of certain types of technology. And it was commonly said, I don't know why, to be honest, but a lot of people, as soon as they started to work with large language models, the first thing, or one of the first things that they try to do, is extract data from documents. Don't ask me why. It would not be my first choice to go and play around with that technology in that kind of way. I would be doing much more creative, much more exciting things with its probabilistic nature. But that's what people landed on for some reason. So very quickly, there was this kind of almost common sense that, well, large language models can deal with information, unstructured content, unstructured language in such a well way that IDP, intelligent document processing, a technology that's been used for I would say, again, more than 20 years, and has already been implemented in so many enterprises, is actually so common to be used, was suddenly no longer necessary. There was even a blog post from an analyst firm that said IDP is dead. It's as simple as that. It would become the next RPA. Interestingly, if you fast forward to today, that was about 2 years ago, shortly after GPT 3.5 came out. Now we're at an inflection point where everybody is, oh no, we need IDP because it is actually really good and much better than large language models to work with documents and help it understand documents. Because if we just throw our PDFs into the next LLM, it makes mistakes, it has hallucinations, it's not able to keep its context window big enough to actually process all of the data. And if we start to look at the details, it's actually not that accurate, which again is the reason why I said probabilistic. That's the nature of the technology, which is not what you want in what you want to do when you're trying to extract value or extract data from documents. You want that to be specific. It's a huge difference if you submit, for example, an accident report or a claim to your insurer, and that insurer has to pay you a certain amount of money. If your large language model gets it wrong and it says, well, your repair only cost $200, you're going to be very disappointed when it actually costs you 20. And they just say, well, we extracted it from the PDF that you sent us. So all of that is actually hyper important. And also that realization has happened within the market. So at ABBYY, we're continuously trying to strive to make sure that our customers and also just the market understands the value of intelligent document processing, because it is a combination of two, right? So even before that large language models came around, we were already using language models to actually obfuscate and actually make better the extraction results that we were getting. We were using that technology, especially in low quality documents. Why? Probabilistic nature, a lot of noise. You want to make a best guess to get better output. But the difference is that we're using always multiple technology at the same time, all of them transformer based, but actually all trained for a specific goal, whether that's segmentation of data, meaning all of the characters on the document itself, whether that's extracting specific values, or training a model to actually be able to recognize 150 different types of documents. So the interesting thing is that when you bring everything together into a platform that's purpose built for a specific task, for a specific kind of capability that you need within your overall IT architecture, that's when you start to get real results, real outcomes. And that's what customers are looking for right now. But in my specific role, I'm here to help, educate the market, also to help customers along that path. I think the first kind of year that I stepped into this role, it was a lot of conversations with our customers in terms of how they should look at this. And then, of course, now it's also looking at, okay, what is happening in the broader market and how do we actually fit into these new ecosystems? A great example of that, after we had the whole rage to train LLMs more, so people needed more data and very quickly found, okay, all of this data is actually locked away inside of our documents within our organization to do things like retrieval augmented generation. Now that's already moved into AI agents as the next ecosystem. And just like our PA kind of boomed very quickly because there's a very easy way to automate, it looks like AI agents is kind of like the next step that people want to use it to, because it's promising to be even easier to automate certain tasks within the organization. Now, also there, agents need tools. Without tools, they can't actually do anything besides figure out a plan. And even that might be a little bit short-sighted. So IDP, be the ability to have computer vision, be able to read documents and have them do that in a very efficient, but also most importantly, most accurate way, is one of the tools that agents absolutely necessary. And all of the analyst firms already agree to this because it's just so essential within any type of enterprise organization. I don't know if you know this, Max, but 90% of business processes actually contain documents. So you can only imagine the importance of it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But you have mentioned that that's not your preferred choice of working with documents and implementing that technology in that way. You would have done something more creative with it. Is that still applicable to documents, or would you have done something like completely out of left field? I don't know.
In what way?
Well, you've mentioned initially that the application of AI technologies to read and understand documents and work with documents overall is probably not the only noticeable and not the only way to apply that technology. And you would personally prefer to do something more creative with it. And I do
Oh
remember
yeah, for sure.
that happened a long time ago. But um, what would be the creative outlet then? What are something that people maybe not immediately consider? Because you think AI, you think documents, and you think business processes, you think documents. I think that's established enough.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the main difference is that there's several kinds of AI, right? And when I was talking about, I wouldn't use generative AI as my first go-to to solve a document problem is absolutely
Yeah.
true. I wouldn't use that type of technology. I would use everything else, meaning machine learning, having convolutional networks, also transformer-based technology, classification, NLP, you name it. All of those technology already existed way before the inflection point, which is typically kind of pointed at as the inception of ChatGPT, but that's what I would use for those type of technologies. Again, even though for today we are already incorporating large language models into our platform to make sure that you can solve even more complex technologies, actually complex use cases. And what do I mean by that is that when you do need that probabilistic nature of a large language model, that's when it's actually going to create this 1 + 1 = 3 type of story. So I guess it comes back to my earlier point that there's not one size fits all. You can't solve a real world problem with a single type of technology. You always need to have basically a toolbox and use the right technology at the right time to help you solve the problem. But to get back to your creative question, actually, thanks for asking that, because what I love absolutely about what Gen AI brings, like, right, specifically that variation of artificial intelligence, is that it solves the blank slate problem. Um, I love being creative in the sense that I love writing about things, sharing my opinion, whether that's through blogs, whether that's through the podcast like this. But what it actually helped me solve within my personal kind of workflow is the blank slate problem. I could feed it ideas and it would give me back ideas. Are those ideas perfect? Does it always understand what I'm trying to say? No, but the simple fact that, again, it's going to make this best possible and most accurate prediction as it can of what you would like to see as an answer, it actually gives me ideas in terms of how I can make my idea better. So the simple kind of back and forth that you can create now between your alternate version of yourself, because that's also the interesting bit. If you feed it enough information about yourself, you can actually be talking back to yourself as well. And I do that as a creative process. So I use a large language model. I've got different variations of it. I've got one running locally here on my computer. I've also got a couple of services in the cloud. But what I've done is I've shared with it how I write, how I talk. And then when I go out for my daily walk and I try to get creative, thinking about what is the next thing that I should probably do, what should I create in terms of content, I have a conversation and I can kind of hear myself think and hear myself talk back to me as well, which makes for a very interesting kind of conversation the very first time, because you gotta get taken aback about, okay, would I really say something as stupid as that? But it also helps you kind of improve in terms of how you position things, how you think about things. And that's what I love about the technology, that you're able to brainstorm with it so quickly. And I don't see anything that we could actually do with that before. And that's just one application of it. That's the creative side. If I look at what some artists right now are doing using the similar type of technology, but then in video, images, what we're able to do now and how quickly we're able to do it, I actually think that's absolutely stellar. What I love most about it was when the first time I actually tried to create a new image. I've always had amazing ideas in my head and actually have a cousin who's able to work with 3D image creation. He can make videos on his computer that look real as life. And I was so jealous for such a long time because I could not take the ideas from my mind and actually put them into reality, even virtual reality. Now, by the fact that I can use natural language to express what it is that I'm looking for, I'm not going to say that I can get it exactly the way that I see things in my head, but I can definitely get really, really close, really, really fast without having to go through this whole kind of learning curve of learning yet another platform, another software, and also just have the patience, because that's the thing that he has that I don't, which is a lot of patience to make it perfect. Where I am always, quite kind of impatient, to be honest, to actually get to something. And because it's in my head, it needs to come out right now. And why doesn't the computer understand me? So that's the other thing that I love about the creative side of these types of new technologies and how you can leverage them. And I think if you look at it from a social kind of perspective, how it changes the world a little bit, is that so many more people are now able to kind of let their creativity flow, because the tools that you now have to use or that you have at your disposal have become even easier, right? Everybody could always do it. It was just harder to do, which means that you kind of limited it to a group that had both the focus, had the ability. But now, because people can just explain what they want, that is something that means a larger group of people are going to be able to express their creativity, which I think is absolutely awesome, because we always need more of that. That's the fun side of life, I would say.
Oh yes, oh yes. That's a very, very cool use point that you pointed out, because I tend to do a lot of the kind of same process. I also try and solve the blank slate problem a lot of the time when working creatively, on this podcast, in my day to day, when working with employees or whatever. I don't search for solutions, but I do like having somebody to bounce ideas off of, basically.
Hmm.
Is the idea I came up with, enough to pass the LLM test, whether or not they will consider like poking holes in it. And they always can. And when they do, you can kind of see the obvious ones, and then you can see the ones that are, okay, that's just very, very far fetched. The idea is fine, but thanks for your input. And you know, the other side of it, the dark side of this approach, that I feel, is that when executives hear us speak, what they often hear is, okay, so Max does not need a copywriter, Max does not need an editor, Max does not need extra time, he can do it on his walk to work, so why am I paying all of these people? Why shouldn't we just optimize the process and the end result will be the same? And I feel that a lot of executives tend to think that way. And me, hey, as an executive myself, I do feel tempted sometimes. I see this shiny new toy and I'm like, okay, maybe I can, divert some of the resources that I have from this thing that I'm doing with somebody else's hands, and I can take that person's brain and put it to work somewhere else. And it's nice to kind of optimize and tinker and do all of that stuff. But unfortunately, it all comes down, in my opinion, to what you've mentioned is, knowledge. Basically, how knowledgeable are you about the tools that you're trying to implement, about the field that you're working with,
Hmm.
about the problems that you're solving, and so on and so forth. So a lot of executives want just quick solutions, quick fixes by implementing AI. And I don't know. I can't outright state that that's the wrong approach. I'm not the best executive of the largest company in the world. Definitely, my opinion matters very little in the grand scheme of things. But what are your opinion? How do executives generally approach it from your end? Maybe you see much smarter and much knowledgeable people in your line of work than I do.
Well, I think the problem that you stated exists everywhere at every single type of organization, and it kind of comes back to the risk that I outlined earlier with the fact that technology is becoming more mainstream, meaning that a lot more people see it in their daily news, which also means that it creates this kind of perception that is able to do a lot of things that it might not actually be able to do, or that it could, but that people underestimate the amount of work that still goes into it. And I think that's really the way that a lot of, I would say, executives across the board, every type of organization, kind of looked at it firsthand. Right? It was like new type of technology at demo value, and I think it specifically that as a demo, it's stellar. It's amazing. It's mind blowing what it can do. But when you try to actually make that practical, um, that's when it gets a little bit more tricky. And I think that's also why you see that so many creative applications of the technology, specifically Gen AI, because that's what we're talking about. That's where a lot of investment has gone over the last couple of years. Um, you see the success and the continued stickiness of applications in the creative space, right? That's where people continue to use it because it actually solved the real problem. It solved the problem for you. It solved the problem for me. But if you go into the more practical side of business, the more structured side of business, where there is a process, where there are multiple people that have to work together, where there are multiple systems that have to work together, it's no longer personal productivity, which is again where a lot of money has gone. And a lot of people thought that it would have a massive impact. Think about all the co-pilots and everything else. Now they've seen that the ROI of that is not what they were looking for. If you actually then look at what is the actual outcome that they're looking for, is actually enterprise automation. It is in the actual end-to-end process that they have within their businesses, within your organization, that you actually want to go solve and solve for the better. Now, here comes the second part of that equation, which is you can know that that area might be what you need to focus on, but actually just throwing technology at it is still not going to solve your problem. And that's another mistake that I've seen happen a lot over the last couple of months, where people are just like, hey, great, this is the thing that we have to focus on, this particular business process or just business process in general. We're going to throw technology at it, maybe at one single step, and make that step go faster. Now, Max, I'll ask you the question. What happens when you make a bad process faster?
It gives you bad results, but quickly.
Exactly. So, and that's the thing that a lot of, executives need to start realizing, which is you have to understand your process first. That's step one. Then you have to look at which parts of the process actually create the bottlenecks within your organization. What do we need to change? And it's only then, when you have an understanding of the process and how to improve it, that you should go look at the right technology to go fix it. So that's where you're currently seeing, I would say, I'm not going to say a renaissance. That feels a little bit weird because the technology has always been around. But process intelligence, that's process mining, task mining, the ability to map and kind of have information about how a process in an organization flows. That is something that's also been around for a while. But now it is increasing in importance again. Because if we think back to our conversation about agents, can you imagine unleashing an agent and telling it, this is your task, right? You were going to replace a few of those people and say, well, I can just give this to an AI agent and tell it this is the task that you have to go solve. It doesn't have any clue about your organization, none whatsoever. Again, there's a BAT process today. So what is it going to do? It's going to try to figure out what that BAT process is, and it's going to try to do it faster because that's the way that it's going to find information across different systems. We've already seen that, like you just said, making a BAT process faster just gets you just the same bad results, but only quicker, which is not what you want. So it's really that where it has to start for all of these executives, that they understand the process first, that there's even technology for that. It used to be, the Post-its on the wall, 500 consultants walking through all of your halls for weeks and weeks on end. But today it doesn't have to be that way anymore. Technology can help you solve that problem, but it's still where you have to start. And then you can start looking at how to implement the solution for the better process.
So then how do you measure the success or failure of implementing AI solutions? If it's not the speed of the process that you already have, the effectiveness of the process is something more or less intangible, because you may need to destroy the process wholeheartedly and you may need to replace it with something else, or you may need to look at a different place in an organization. What, in your experience, is the wrong way of implementing AI?
Well, so in terms of the wrong way, is indeed a lot of times there's focus on speed, and I would say the speed at which a certain step within the process is happening, or the amount of human involvement that there is within a certain step within the process. The thing that is then hard to quantify is actually showing, hey, did the overall process become better? You might have tangible numbers and facts and perhaps even ROI on that one single step. But what we've seen time and time again is that when you automate a single step, for example, it actually creates a bottleneck down the line, which you haven't discovered yet because you didn't know it existed. Or when you actually input the numbers and say, I'm going to make this step 2 times faster, you might actually see, using process intelligence, that is going to create a bottleneck somewhere else. That's the whole concept of the digital twin. You can change the digital twin of an actual process and see how that's going to have an effect on other steps within the process itself. So you can measure the outcome. So that's something that we're currently definitely, I would almost say, preaching. And maybe sometimes we're preaching to the choir, but nonetheless, it's important that we do, because it's simple. It's a simple fact that right now, again, agents are the next kind of hype, and it's all about automation within a business. But automation without insight into your process is not going to get you where you want to go. So the beauty of process intelligence is that you can measure what your current kind of implementation look like. You can predict the ROI that you're going to get at the end if you do certain changes within your process and you implement certain technologies. Now, what are typical measurements for that? Certainly, time is always a factor, right? Because time is money. That equation continues to exist. But that then also quickly equates to, okay, can we look at a higher value? If you look at a process, for example, that insurance claim that we talked about earlier, if we get it wrong, right, and we use the wrong technology, we just slapped an LLM into the middle of it that's going to extract data and make decisions on whether a claim should be paid or not, one, you have to go back, and that has to go back through the whole system. That means it's actually going to cost more, even though that first time pass might have cost significantly less, simply because it's faster. So if you look at the problem holistically and you look at, okay, what is going to be the actual value that I'm going to get from changing this process? It means that my overall claim amount, or the cost that it has to the organization, will actually be a lot lower. My customer satisfaction will be a lot higher because people are getting back their claims faster. They're much more accurate. They don't have to wait. And then, of course, there's the simple compliance kind of metric as well, which means that if you can prove the way your processes work and what the technologies in them do, that make your whole life easier as an organization, especially moving forward. Simply because if you look at the different AI acts that are being enacted, I think the EU definitely is already coming. Part of it is in effect now, but it's going to go in real kind of next level in 2026. You see that there's a lot of AI compliance there, even for systems that are already in place today. Even low risk systems have to have that level of kind of accountability and also explainability, visibility to anybody, meaning their customers as well. So creating that insight into your organization and your processes now to flag that and show how the AI is working and that it's making decisions. And where needed, it's not making any kind of high risk decision that is being left to a human. That is going to have a massive impact down the line, simply because you're not going to be at risk for certain amounts of fines. And I don't know if you looked at the numbers, but the fines associated with the AI Act, they're significant, is the least I could say.
Indeed, indeed. And some argue that it's that rigidness of the AI Act that stifles innovation and leaves Europe behind its competitors, say China and the US, in terms of AI innovation. Because why regulate it? Why stop it? Full speed ahead, only green skies or green fields and blue skies. What's your opinion? Is it fast enough? Is it rigid enough? Or is it too lax, maybe?
Well, it's we had a very interesting philosophical discussion on that topic. It was actually we hosted an AI summit at London in London at the Emirates Stadium, the Arsenal Stadium, and I had a good friend of mine there, Alexander Hanf, and he's a data privacy ethics expert. He's also a lawyer at heart, which makes for a very kind of interesting person to say. So we were having this kind of philosophical conversation about the topic whilst we were recording an episode for my podcast, the AI Pulse. And basically, we kind of ended up to the conclusion that actually, technology is not the problem. People are the problem. We ourselves are the problem of how we implement and use the technology. So how do you relate that back to the AI Act? Well, I think, yes, the European AI Act is, at face value, it's quite strict in the sense that it's very strict compared to some other options that are out there in the world. I've even heard of cases that in certain regions, the author rights and copyright are no longer valid if it means that you can have advances in AI for this particular country. I'm going to be interested to see how the US is going to evolve under the new administration. But I think overall, the European AI Act gets a lot of it right. I would say that it's actually still not moving fast enough, but it's moving faster than I've ever seen before. I used to, when the AI Act used to kind of started to share their first bits and pieces, I kind of joked that they were using ChatGPT to write it because usually they're not so fast in putting legislation out. But that being said, it has to be in place. I think we've all seen at least I've seen the Black Mirror episodes from Netflix where you had the social scoring. That is something that we have to avoid at all costs. And if that means that innovation will go more slowly at first, simply because we have to work around that hurdle and the technology vendors have to figure out a way how to do it without creating that kind of Black Mirror dystopia, that is simply something that we'll have to do. But also, if you put into perspective, when you think about, is it slowing innovation? Isn't innovation growing incredibly quickly? I think not a single person at this point in time, whether that's you, whether that's me, we're both, in this space. We want to track what's happening in the world. We have these conversations day in, day out, like we're having today. Nonetheless, in the 45 minutes that we've been talking, probably something's happened that we should know about, but maybe we never will, simply because there's so much innovation happening all at the same time. So I think it's not a problem innovation. I think it's a problem that we have this type of different views within the world. Nonetheless, I'm a strong supporter of the AI Act here in Europe, simply because it kind of outlines the different things that have to be simply communicated. And a lot of times, I think there's also a lot of a misunderstanding about it, that sometimes you just have to explain how something works. But that does bring me back to the inability of a lot of organizations to actually explain how they work and what their processes look like, and where AI is involved, and where actually AI as we kind of knew it before ChatGPT, and even to this day, was already involved in all of our lives. When I talk about that claim with an insurance broker, um, they were doing those kind of things, extraction of data from conversations, from emails, from documents, way before. But now it all has to come into the light. So I think what it did is really create this onus on the organizations to be very transparent, to avoid kind of debacles like you had in the US, which I thought was a really great example and had very negative impacts both on just the society there, but also on personal lives, because the CEO of that insurance company got shot simply because they implemented a system and it started to have bias, it started to have negative impacts on people's claims, and that impacted a lot of people, to the point that somebody said, I'm not taking this, I'm not actually going to allow this, and took matters into their own hands, which is sad. So that's kind of, the different extremes almost that you have within the world right now, that there's, more on the focus on the innovation at all costs, which might come at a big toll at some point. And then, yes, Europe is a little bit more, okay, we're going to make sure that we put up the right guardrails, but we're not going to block or hinder innovation, but we just want it to be done in the right way, which I think is absolutely really important, because otherwise we are going to end up at some point in a Black Mirror episode, which is fun as they are to watch, is not where I want to be.
Yeah, well, that's completely true. First of all, I do agree. I've stated many times on the show and outside of the show that I am more so a supporter of regulation rather than a naysayer about it. What I liked about the regulation, the recent kind of provisions that came into effect in February, I think it provides a nice framework of how you should address AI as a technology. And it ties very nicely to what you mentioned in the beginning about the level of knowledge and understanding that the general populace has and decision makers have and everybody that uses the technology has. So I see it more as a guidance. Here's how you can address those systems. Here's an acceptable level of risk. Here's an acceptable level of risk. And here's something in between. Here's how you can address those systems. Here's if they are trying to achieve something. Here's how we should view them. And that does not mean that they shouldn't do it or couldn't experiment with it. It just gives a framework of doing it. And yeah, like name a more iconic duo than bad systems and bias in the US. So it's kind of that's something that you want to avoid. That's again ties to
Self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
Indeed. Like if you have a bad system and you implement AI on top of the bad system, it gives you bad results just faster. So that racial
Yeah.
bias, that class bias, or any other bias that exists within a system is just going to be augmented and more effective. So regulation hopefully will help you combat that through more complex and more actionable approaches, I would say. So, but of course, time will tell.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is also just transparency, right? The enforcement of transparency, which I think is an important component of the AI Act. If you look at companies and organizations that are in the low risk category, they're obliged to offer transparency to their customers and to their end customers, their customer's customer, which I think is a right step in the great step in the first direction. It's very low effort, but it does create this kind of understanding for everybody how everything works behind the scenes, and not this black hole that you typically have within larger organizations. Nobody really knows, and the enforcement of that transparency, I think, is a very good first step in making sure that when they offer that, it's something visible, and that anybody that wants to hold them accountable for offering the transparency, or maybe see a discrepancy where they should be in a different category of risk, they can call that out. But just having that transparency makes absolute sense, and I think that's where our kind of region is very different from a lot of other ones, because we value that transparency. We want to know how organizations work, and we should know. We feel like it's our right to know, and I also feel that same way, that it's simply something that should be out in the open. And like you said, the provisions that have now come into effect are indeed offering that framework. And there's already organizations, like, for example, we're working with one called For Humanity that actually is building out these frameworks to help organizations do both either self-assessment, so that's absolutely possible. As an organization, you can self-assess in which category that you are, what level of transparency that you have to offer, or you can work with a third party. Oftentimes, these are non-for-profits, so they will actually help you with this process because they simply want that transparency to exist, and that we all live in a society where AI is not going to take over, or that it's going to have those negative impacts because of biases, bad processes delivering bad results just faster.
Indeed, indeed. Completely agree with that. And on that topic of transparency and, honesty, even, there's a lot of companies out there. There's a lot of startups, there's a lot of products. All of them are powered by AI, made by AI focused, and it's AI, all the way down. So how do you, as an executive making a decision to implement a very large scale solution into your organization, or an investor looking to invest into a startup, or just, little old user trying to use something that will make your life a little bit better? How do you look at somebody, at a company, at a solution that is AI powered, and how do you find that, there is something there, that it does do something effective or good, or if it's just hype and marketing and it's just a GPT wrapper and nothing else?
Yeah. There's a lot of GPT wrappers out there, and in all honesty, sometimes they can actually, because you name three different categories in my mind. The enterprise, which is a totally different ballpark in terms of what they should be looking for, versus
Yeah,
the end user. They can be quite happy with a GPT wrapper. It might actually
yeah.
make their life easier. So I do think that it's in all categories. The one kind of constant is, does it actually solve the problem? Does it achieve the outcome that I'm looking for? That's the main thing. But as we've gone through both AI washing, we had greenwashing a couple of years ago. Everybody was suddenly very ecological, planting trees and everything else. We still do that, but nonetheless, now we've moved to AI washing, and actually right now we're moving to agent washing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the RPA world. If you look at the RPA world today, suddenly you're going to see that it's actually in an agent world. I attended the AI summit in New York and was watching a couple of headlining presentations of RPA vendors, and the amounts of times that I heard are actually the word agents. I was like, okay, this is still an RPA bot, but now you're just calling it differently. Nonetheless, people were clapping and they were quite impressed with what they were seeing. So I think it comes back to, again, the level of knowledge, the level of nomenclature that's out there, and what it actually all means, how it's different, what it is not. So it is an important question to ask. How do you kind of filter out the real from what is just AI washing and good marketing? I think for enterprises, there's a couple of key components to that. First of all, as an enterprise executive, I can only strongly recommend to actually start with looking at the outcomes that this organization that you want to work with, or that you, if looking for, has already achieved. Did they already solve the problem that you have before? Did they solve it with a customer? Can you give them the numbers? Can they tell you how many FTEs that they saved? What kind of number that they were actually to save in terms of dollars or euros, etc.? There are certain metrics that can help you define, okay, they've done this before, they understand this, and it seems their technology works because they have a customer that's willing to talk about it publicly. So I think that's one of the most important things. And then secondly, for me, even when I go out and we need to find a certain type of tool within our organization to help us with our processes, I always ask the question, okay, tell me about your technology, because I'm a technologist at heart, so I want to know how it works. But if they only can tell me about, GPT this or Claude that or Anthropic or OpenAI, or we're using Microsoft Azure, we're using this function here, I very quickly go down to the kind of question of, okay, but what's your IP? Right? You've kind of stitched different technologies together, and now that you've told me how, okay, not that I want to, but if I wanted to, I could actually go and do exactly the same thing. You've explained what the blueprint is, and there's nothing proprietary in there. You're just making very fancy prompts into many different platforms, and you're kind of wrapping that together, and you're telling me it's a great solution. So I think if you really go down to that level and you do have a couple of technical people on your team that are able to understand what they're saying and really prod around a little bit, you want to look for the practicality. Are they being practical about the technology that I'm going to need as a buyer to actually solve my problem? I would love nothing more that, if I'm the buyer and I meet with a technology company that has both the, something that might be 30 years old in terms of technology, and they have something that was built yesterday, that they tell me, Max, for the problem that you've got right now, we can solve that. And you can use it with our technology that we've already been working on for 30 years. Why would I love that? Because I know it works. It's not going to have any bugs. They've been kind of developing on it for 30 years. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. Somebody else is paid to fix it. What's the downside to that as an organization? So it's really not about, just looking for all of the AI powered and everything. It's important, right? If it's implemented correctly, then it can really help accelerate, right? I'll give the examples of something that happened with one of our customers. They tried to solve the problem that they had, which was that they had to work through lease agreements and they had to extract, for compliance reasons, 360 different fields, points of data from this very complex document. They actually had 60 FTEs doing that. And those 60 FTEs had an accuracy rate, 60 humans had an accuracy rate within a compliance process of 45%.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's not good.
Not good
That's
at
not good.
all.
So
No.
they tried to solve it, like a lot of people did with the LLMs. They just threw GPT-4o at it and said, these are all the questions, these are all the fields that we need to have. At first, looked amazing. It immediately came back with a lot of answers. When they started to cross-reference and check, turns out that it was giving them an answer, but it wasn't the answer they were looking for. It was a lot of hallucinations. It didn't get everything wrong, but it got a lot of it wrong. And again, in a compliance use case, you cannot have that. In all honesty, they then tried with an IDP vendor that offered, it was what is now considered a traditional IDP vendor. They're not the Gen AI powered IDP vendor. And what they did is they tried it with that, and they couldn't get it to work either. They could only get so far. That was the interesting thing about this. It wasn't until they came to us and we said, okay, well, we're going to use our technology, and we have a connector to GPT-4o or whatever it is that you want to use as an LLM service. And for this one field, and that's where the problem was, it's not about data extraction. It was about data interpretation. Within this lease, there's a certain attachment to it, which is basically, it's a typical American thing. Somebody has to give an opinion on a certain lease. Actually, it's the building that they have to give an opinion on, but it's an opinion. I could give you my opinion, and you could give me an opinion on the same subject. It will be entirely different. So that had to be interpreted into something of structured information. What is something that is perfect to do that? Taking the probabilistic and kind of transforming that and understanding the probabilistic. That's what large language models are very good at. So what we did after they've burned through a lot of cache, pushing all of those tokens in, lengthy documents, 600 pages, they burned through a lot of it. We actually did all of the segmentation. We extracted 359 of those fields using our technology. And then for that last bit, we send only that segment of the document into the LLM, means data security. There's no visibility of anything else that's going on in those documents. And then we got back the answer. So that meant that they could go from all of those STEs to now 3, and they have an accuracy rate of 85% within their compliance use case and growing because the system's learning as it's going.
No,
So it really brings kind of together the things that I've been saying. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir at this point, but there's not one size that fits all. If you combine technology in the right way, that's when it really gives you the magic that people are looking for.
That kind of sounds like you need to do more due diligence when working with AI tools than if you're working with any other tool. Like, you just have to be more knowledgeable. It all comes down to how
Yeah.
much you understand. And, AI is a useful tool, I guess, in my opinion. Yeah, a useful tool that you can implement in many facets of your professional life and your personal life. But if the groundwork isn't there, if your processes are bad or biased or ineffective, not just because of speed, but just in the way that they are designed, or if the goals that you're trying to achieve are vague, nebulous, and unachievable in their own right, then that tool is only going to make things worse. Like, it may look nicer, like in your example, you'll get a lot of answers, and those answers will, on first
Yeah,
glance, look like answers that you expect to give. But as soon as you start digging into it, as soon as you kind of give it a bit of scrutiny, then it falls apart. And you need to work on that. And you need to make the extra step. And it's not a quick fix, easy solution, one fits all band-aid that many people believe it to be. So
100%.
that's good to be in agreement from an AI expert, because I am definitely not. I am definitely a layman when it comes to actual technologies. I do rely on my people, like friends in tech world, to explain stuff to me. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm looking at it like, okay, yeah, sounds very fancy, but does it actually achieve the goal? And if it does, I'm happy enough. Just like in your example
Exactly.
with the users. So is there anything that people need to look out for besides LLMs and GPTs and, agentic that we've already mentioned maybe? What's to look out for in the next years? I have been away from RPA for a little bit while. So last time I looked at RPA, it was very, very custom made, where you come in, you look at the process, you build kind of a cluster of solutions tied together with engineers, and then it kind of works sort of if you maintain it and spend enough money to maintain it. So is AI agents that underlooked technology, or is it where the hype is going and the underlooked technology that is very useful is something else?
Well, I would say that actually AI agents are both at the moment.
Mm,
I'll explain why. So AI agents right now are indeed the hype, and hype always has a starting point, just like OpenAI was a starting point for the hype around Gen AI. Now, I would say that actually Salesforce is to blame for the agent hype,
mm,
because they pivoted entirely to that paradigm. Nonetheless, I'm actually quite hopeful in terms of AI agents actually solving a couple of things that RPA could not, making automation easier within large complex processes, and actually, again, giving more people access to technology that they can leverage to help automate their day-to-day operations, but also end-to-end processes. It comes back to what I said before, that now I can let my creativity actually get from my mind into a piece of paper or a screen or whatever. I can visualize it because I can now explain what it is that I want. If we can give that kind of capability and transform that into something that is about enterprise automation, you can also imagine a lot more people are going to be actually productive. They don't have to learn a tool. They don't have to understand how the technology works. They can just talk to it and it will figure it out on the back end. Now, the thing is, that's why I'm saying that it's both hype and kind of a little bit underestimated. Because of the hype, people are like, okay, this is just the next thing that the market wants us to look at, that they want us to invest in. And because there's, I'm not going to say none, but there's very little proven outcomes so far. There's very little proven ROI. Um, Nonetheless, and this is where people are kind of like a little bit sketchy at the moment. They're like, well, we tried getting ROI out of Gen AI, it didn't really work. I think the first year when they started measuring it, about 90% of POCs failed. The year after that, it was about 67%. It went down. So things got more successful because people were not, being better at implementing the technology. They just found the right use cases for it. So that's why the number of failed POCs went down. Now with agents, we're going to do the same thing, but it's actually going even faster. The thing is that agents are built to actually have a practical use case, which is automation. Tasks that you can replicate, tasks that you can automate, that's what they're there for. The reason that I'm very actually excited about it as a technology is first of all, it's an extension of, right? It is an extension of, again, existing technologies being orchestrated together. Now, not in a way that you have to, as a human, define what that needs to look like, but actually that the automation, the agent orchestrates the different tools that it has at its disposal in its own fashion to solve the problem. That's really cool. But the reason that I'm very hopeful about technology is because the awareness of what I was talking about sooner, which is the process intelligence, the ability to understand your process before going on automation, is much more prevalent right now than it's ever been before. So that's why I'm quite optimistic in terms of the agent kind of architecture, the agent kind of approach succeeding, simply because people kind of already realize what they're getting into. They know that if they don't understand the process and don't explain the process as it is currently properly and have it, set up in the right way, that it will just fail. It will just be another failed AI POC. And they don't want to be part of that metric anymore. I think the last time I checked, the number was actually 80% of AI projects today still fail. People do not want to be the 80%. They want to be the 20%. And that's interesting because still overall IT projects have a high failure rate, right? So the metric for just IT projects in general is still about 50 to 60%. But AI has a much higher failure rate. Newer technology, people don't fully understand everything that we've talked about so far. But again, for AI agents, I would definitely look into it. If I can make a recommendation for anybody that's listening, look into it, understand it properly, understand that it can only work if you can feed it with the knowledge of your organization. That is both how your organization works and the knowledge that it has that's typically locked away inside of your documents. The other side is you have to explain it how your processes work, which is something that process intelligence can help you with. If you provide it with what it currently looks like, you can also provide it with, okay, if you do these things and you change these types of steps within this particular process, then you can get to this type of ROI. You've given it a blueprint of what it actually needs to go do. So that combination and the fact that that realization exists already today in the market, that that's absolutely a necessary step before even going into it, that's what got me very hopeful that this technology could indeed be the next step in terms of enterprise automation and provide much better results than RPA ever did. And now that people are kind of getting a little bit tired of yet another API to talk to, or iPaaS services, they want it to all kind of be integrated into a platform. It's still going to be some time, in my honest opinion, before we see a lot of the agent frameworks rise to a level of, I would say, enterprise grade, but it's going to happen fast. I fully predict that within this year, we're going to see the first enterprise type of deployments in a typical type of organization, simply because they realized what needs to happen to actually go into that. And the process understanding, the ability to understand the process before you get started, and the compliance side, because remember back to our conversation about the AI Act, making decisions based on AI, or actually having AI making decisions, that upgrades you and that risk level, right? So you have to keep that in mind. But the
True.
explainability factor comes from the fact that you actually are already monitoring your process for compliance. That's the beauty of the process intelligence technology. It can define what your process looks like today. You can figure out what it needs to look like in the future. You can have the agent implement the automation, and the process intelligence technology continues to monitor it for compliance so it doesn't deviate from what it's supposed to do. So, again, a culmination of multiple capabilities that we have, some that we have already had, some new, some things that are still being developed. But we're definitely heading into that direction of having computer systems that we can explain a problem to and that it will go solve it because it has all the right tools at its disposal. So I always love making kind of references to sci-fi TV shows or movies, but this was one from Star Trek where Scotty actually ended up back in the past and he saw a computer and wanted to have it do something and he started just screaming at the screen, and then the person from that same time frame actually pointed at the mouse and he picked it up and he started talking to the mouse. So that really kind of explains of where we've been, where we're going to, and that type of reality is getting closer and closer, and that gets me really excited.
Hopefully, it will be Star Trek and not, I don't know. Well, Black Mirror was an example that we don't want to go towards,
That's
right?
going to be down to us. It's all going to
Yeah,
be down to us.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So then, looking at the future, um, what do you feel like when those processes do get implemented, when AI agents will have a framework and they will be employed mass scale? Does that mean that there is no need for a lot of jobs that currently exist on the market? So I've heard And when people talk about AI agents, I've heard a thought that your one person unicorn is going to happen very, very soon, all thanks to agents, because everything will be eliminated as waste. And the only thing that a founder really needs is a clear vision and a strong focus, and that's it. So, what's your opinion on this? Is AI going to eliminate jobs, or is it going to create some, maybe?
If history can be a teacher, it tells us that both will happen, right? Just like with any technology shifts that we have every 10 to 15 years, jobs will continue to be created, jobs will cease to exist. Um, simply because I can now convey my creative thoughts into an image. Does that mean I don't need designers anymore to help me put things together? Absolutely not. I still need them more than ever. And actually, it's always the adoption of it that makes for two different categories of people. There's the opposition to technology. They're like, it's going to take my job. I do not want to touch it. I'm very kind of, pushing it back as much as I can to stave off the inevitable. But it is the inevitable in the end, where you also then again have artists that are on the other side of the fence that are adopting the technology as quickly as they can to see what they can do with it and elevate what they do to a next level. So in comparison, the dynamic doesn't really change. I'm still an amateur when it comes to creating visuals, creating art, and they are the experts because they already have the prowess of creativity. They have the ability to work with tools in real life. They have the technology to also work with and know how the complex problem goes. And now they can introduce even more technology. It's not because you give me a paintbrush that I'm suddenly a painter. I still have to figure out how to actually use it. And it's the same with every single technology shift, right? So if you look at Gen AI, that technology shift is full flux right now. Jobs are being created. The prompt engineer suddenly came out of nowhere, and people have employed them. On the other side, there are people whose productivity has kind of been surpassed by technology, or certain steps in the process are no longer necessary, like we had in that use case that I talked about. But I think the thing is that this is just the inevitability of every technology shift. And there's always a balance. Jobs will always be created, other jobs will always cease to exist. But it's all going to be down to, I will always say, at a personal level, that if you adopt the technology and you're not kind of scared of it, you're willing to embrace it, you're willing to learn it and continue to up level yourself, there will always be opportunity for you. So that one person unicorn, absolutely. I've seen businesses being created out of nothing, out of thin air, built by people that have no technical background because they learned the tools that are available to them, help them create that kind of thing that they wanted to exist. It's often solving a very simple problem, but people want it. So, and then now they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month. So it's always going to be the duality. I don't think that this technology shift is any different from any of the ones that have come before. When RPA came into effect, people were also like, "Oh no, we're going to automate things that I do manually." Well, yes, we are, but that allows you to do something that's much more valuable for the organization. So, yeah, it's always going to be a mix of both, but it really comes down to if you adopt the technology, if you learn it, if you actually want to strive to become, I would say, the next level version of yourself because you're able to employ this new tool effectively, you will have every single benefit. You will have a leg up compared to everybody else.
That's a nice way of thinking about it, an optimistic way of thinking about it, I feel. I am the same way again. I also stated many times that I am more so an optimist when it comes to technologies, that there have been disruptions and innovations in our life. And as I think it was Henry Ford who said that if I asked the people what they want, they would have said faster horses. So we're not there. Whole industries have been disrupted, whole industries have gone away, whole people's lives that they've spent working on developing a skill is no longer applicable, even in my own example. So the funny example is that I like writing. I like the written word. Generally speaking, I am fond of speech and language and how it interacts and
Mm-hmm.
evolves and works, especially different languages coalescing with one another and so on and so forth. So I've always considered my great skill to write a very complex email, like, like just negotiating something or like outlining very
Yeah.
complex thoughts where you kind of have to really sit down and find the right words, where you contemplate which one is the right one and which place is the best one to put that one word. And now, realistically speaking, you just give the tone to an LLM and it creates whatever the hell you want, and then you tweak it with a couple of things, and that's it. So that whole skill kind of no longer matters in a way. I still go through the same creative process. I still have an understanding of what a great email is or any piece of communication. I just have more tools to do it, so I can make them faster. I can experiment. I can do it more effectively. So has it been impacted? Yes. Would I spend the same amount of time if I was again growing up, learning how to combine words together in, by hand? Probably no. But I would have
Mhm.
a tool that will help me do it much faster, much effectively, in a much larger scale. So the road would be different, but I think the end result is still the same. And that's just,
I would
personal
agree with
anecdote.
that. Yeah, for sure. For sure. But actually, I want to, I think the way that I always put it is that because a lot of people see it the same way in the sense that, okay, we now have these tools, so I can be as effective in email writing, to use your example, as you can be. And I kind of disagree. To some level, yes. On the basics, sure. If you're a really bad email writer or if you're a bad communicator, it can help you become the same as everybody else. I think if you're an expert, and it's because everything that comes out of a language model, it all comes down to the fact that you have given it input. So the level of quality of your input will be reflected in the actual output of that tool, just the same as every other tool. The saying shit in, shit out continues to be absolutely true. And then we see that in everything. Um, and I can see that in when I use it as well, right? If I'm really short on time and I have this deadline that I have to create a piece of content, and I think like, oh, I'm just write it entirely for me, and I just give it a not even an outline, just a gist of what it needs to talk about, and it spits everything out. I get 2 A4 pages, and I start reading, and I'm just like, well, yeah, okay, this is 100% mediocre, but that's not what I want to deliver. And then when you do put in the effort and you give it the outline, you tell it what your thoughts are. And again, this is all about acceleration, just like you said. You can give it less, but it's still high quality input that you provide. And then you get the kind of same level output as you were to kind of the standard that you uphold yourself to. So it's definitely helping people, but the art of having the thoughts, the art of being able to articulate what you can do, I would actually say it's becoming more important, because if you can't, then things that go in come out exactly the same way. It's not going to be of that same level of quality you're actually going to look for, because it still cannot, and it will never, in my opinion, replicate or even approximate human creativity.
I agree. I agree. But we are in that transitionary period where we need to find the right
Yeah.
ways of using those tools, where, going either of the extremes is just too much, where if you refuse to use them because, well, for any reason, like political, personal, or whatever. Like, I do not use AI tools because that is not creativity. Artists that use digital tools are not artists. I still remember that debate for a long time. Like, real artists only use
Yeah.
a brush and the paint, and that's it. But we've kind of moved away from that. People create digital art. It's an acceptable fact. That's fine. Now the same kind of debate goes into, okay, it's an AI that creates a piece of art. It's not a piece of art. There was no intent to it. It does not think like an artist. True. Like, if that's what if you brought in that mindset into an LLM as a tool, then yeah, it has no intent. It is not an artist. But if you are an artist and if you have the skills that artists possess, and it's not just drawing stuff or writing stuff or playing stuff, right? It's more so. It's so many skills intertwined together. Then you may become a much better artist in the end if you learn to work with those tools.
100%.
So to sum up, to kind of give a nice cherry on top of our discussion for today, you've mentioned that there's a statistic, more or less 20% of AI initiatives succeed and 80% fail. What would you say in the next couple of years? What advice would you give to those leaders of those initiatives, or startup founders that are AI focused? How do you get into those 20% and not the 80% that fail?
Yeah, so I think it does really come down to some of the things that we've already touched on throughout this episode, which is first of all, clearly identify what it is that you're trying to solve. I think a lot of times the mistake happens of implementing technology for the sake of technology. And if you think about it realistically, we're going to have much more hype cycles the next couple of years. They're going to be a lot faster. I think the height of the hype will go higher, the low of the low, the trough of disillusionment will be lower each and every single time because it's just going to get exacerbated, and they will all happen faster. We kind of see that acceleration already happening. So I think the realization of fully understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve is one of the most important things. Whether you're building something new or you're implementing and trying to solve a problem within a business, that premise stays the same. And then if we're applying it to specifically to business and we're looking at enterprise leaders or business leaders, I cannot stress enough the fact that you need to understand your processes. I to some extent, I think that is like always step number one, no matter what you want to do, no matter how small the process is. Because having that insight, having that visibility will simply mean that you then have the ability to pick and choose from this huge arsenal that's continued to grow of tools and capabilities, tools and technology, and you can apply it with laser focus. Instead of trying to shoot bazooka, for example, a lot of times that's the LLM. People are trying to shoot the bazooka at a mosquito. The mosquito will be dead, but a lot of other things will probably fail along the way. So I think if I should call out two things, figure out what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then understand how to get there first before you start implementing anything at all.
That's very sound advice, in my opinion. Thank you, Max. Thank you very much. Where do people find you? Where do people find more of your advice?
Well, they can always look me up on LinkedIn. I'm sure you guys will have some link of sorts. And then you can also find my podcast on link down below. And that's actually the very first time I do that. So that's a first link down below. But then you can also find me on Spotify and YouTube with the AI Pulse podcast that I host and that you get a new episode of every single month. So if you feel like hearing more of this or some more detail on these topics with other guests, feel free to link down below, click follow. What are the other things that all of these Instagrammers and YouTubers say? But you can find me for sure. But thank you so much, Max, for having me over. This has been an absolute pleasure.
And thank you for coming. I can attest the pleasure is mutual. And thank you all for listening to us. I hope that pleasure has been shared with you as well. And like as Max said, down below you'll find some more information, and like, share, subscribe, comments, do all of those wonderful things that technology loves to do. Hit the bell to be notified about new episodes coming in. Hit the gym. That's very, very good for your health. Don't hit people though. Well, you can hit people if they consent, but you'll find a way. You'll find a way. You're smart. I believe in you. So thanks for listening. Look out for the next one, and see you next time. Bye-bye.